just a little bit about what we're doing today. We are talking about the listing agreement, the Florida exclusive right of sale listing agreement, and we're also going to be talking about clear cooperation rules. Those are National Association of Realtor rules regarding listings and kind of going away from the coming soon concept, but we're going to talk about the office exclusive waiver and then the just the standard waiver from the MLS, the temporarily exclude the listing from the MLS waiver. So we're going to talk about those two as well. And I do have a copy of the listing agreement I will pull up so that I can share it with you guys. So I'll share my screen with the listing agreement in there. Just to let you guys know that who I am. I'm Rachel. I'm Rachel Sartain. I'm the managing broker for St. Pete, Seminole, and Treasure Island offices. Been in real estate since 2003. I opened the Keller Williams office in downtown back in 2009. That's downtown St. Pete. Recently, I mentioned downtown to somebody and they thought I meant Tampa. No, I don't know how to get over there. JK. But we are downtown St. Pete, so opened that office in 2009 and then also helped launch the Seminole and Treasure Island offices as well. So I've been doing this quite a while, but every day I get stumped with a question and I love that. Every day when you guys ask me a contract question, I always go back to the sales contract or the listing agreement or the buyer broker agreement. I think using the documents are key, so making sure that we're constantly studying those. And I just want to say thank you for those of you who are in here. We got 21 participants. I just love that when you guys are out there learning more, even for some of you guys who are experienced in the business, who currently take listings, you're still looking to enhance your knowledge. And I think that is key for our industry and for your customers. So I just really appreciate you all being here. Again, if you have questions, feel free to take yourself off of mute and put your camera on. You're welcome to join in the meeting space. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can just type it into the chat box. Make sure that you've got everyone selected instead of just panelists, which I don't even know that there is just a panelist since we're, yeah, it's only everyone. So you can type in to everyone anytime you type into the chat box. All right. So in order to get started, I'm going to share my screen. Let me ask you guys, is there anything in particular you're wanting to get out of today's class? If there's something specific about the listing agreement, variable commission, protection period, or clear cooperation rules, or if you've got something outside of those things that you want to make sure that we cover today. Dana says variable commission. Thank you, Dana. If there's something else that you want to make sure that we cover today so that you have a clear understanding, something that's kind of been confusing you, Paul says everything, please make sure and type that. Thank you guys for participating. I love that. All right, so I'm going to share my screen and pull up the, that's not it. I know it's in here. There it is. So I got to stop share and start again. Okay. So I downloaded this from Command. It has somebody's name in here. This is just a fake listing that I have in an opportunity in Command, but I do have the exclusive right of sale listing agreement. This is the Florida Association of Realtors form, can be found on the Florida Association of Realtors. A couple of things that you guys need to look for anytime you're doing contracts of any type. You want to make sure you have the latest edition. This one was revised 5 of 2020. And also there's page numbers. This is page 1 of 4. Each page also has line numbers. So these are the key components of any of the contracts. They're going to have a revision date, they're going to have page numbers, and they're going to have line numbers. The asterisks mean there's a blank for you to fill in. That does not mean that these contracts are fill in the blank only. You should read and really understand the language of all the sales agreements. But before I get to that specific thing, I want to show you one of my famous pictures. You guys ready for this? I'm going to take that as a yes. All right. So we have a buyer. kind of hard with all the stuff on my desk. I guess I should have cleared it off. We have a seller. Who knows what the agreement between the buyer and the seller is called? If you're the sales contract, right? Leah Hertzworm. I'm not sure if that's Leah or if that's Danielle. Either way, I love it. Exactly. So the sales agreement between the buyer and the seller, this is our sales contract. This would be so much faster if not on. So this is the sales contract. So quite often you'll see agents put their commission on the sales contract on the last page of the contract. That is not an agreement for your commission, by the way, guys. The only agreement on the sales contract is an agreement between the buyer and the seller. And then what's the agreement between the seller and the listing broker? Kind of easy one since that's the class we're in. Anybody? The listing contract or the listing agreement, right? So this is hard to do this way, but I'm going to do it anyway. So that's the listing agreement, and that is the agreement between the seller and the listing broker. And then we have an agreement between the listing broker and the buyer broker. Where is the agreement for compensation? There's only one place you can find agreement for compensation from the listing broker to the buyer broker. Who knows where that is? Look at Dana Garvin in the house on fire. MLS, exactly. That's the only place that there is an actual contract between the buyer broker and the listing broker for compensation, unless, of course, you had a commission agreement. Who is the commission agreement typically with? Trick question. Anybody? Kristen says a for sale by owner. Joy says broker to broker. You can, Joy, thank you. You can have a commission agreement, broker to broker. You can also have a commission agreement, broker to seller. So it is just an agreement of the amount of commission being paid. So guys, if the property is not in the MLS and you do not have a signed document regarding commission, do you have an agreement to be paid by the listing broker? No, exactly, Dana. So what's the agreement between the buyer and the buyer broker called? The BBA. And what's that stand for, Dana? Buyer broker agreement. Hey, Joy, do you guys, and Paul, do you guys have buyer broker agreements in your state? Do you use them there?
Yeah, we call it buyer agency.
Buyer agency, buyer broker agreement. Exactly. Okay. Are they used on a regular basis there, Paul?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Everywhere. Yeah. So it's funny to me because in some states, like it's expected, buyers expect to sign an agreement with the buyer's agent. But in the state of, in our area, it's funny, a lot of agents shy away from this. It's probably just because they don't know how to use it or they don't know the benefit. But I like to draw out this picture because I think it's very important that you see that everybody has a contract with one another in some form or fashion, all right? The buyer broker, though, rarely has a contract with the seller unless it's a for sale by owner. The buyer doesn't have an agreement with the listing broker. The only place that you as the buyer broker have a compensation agreement from the listing broker is in the MLS. So I just think it's important that we look at it this way because it helps us when we get into the listing agreement and start talking about the language. Any questions that you guys have on this right here? Kristen, what did I miss on this picture? The screw, that's right. So it's very hard for me to draw. Let's see how good I am. You guys ready for this? So this is my This is my classic Rachel. For those agents who don't like to use a buyer broker agreement, this is classic Rachel. It's so much easier on an actual dry erase board. I hope I'm entertaining you guys right now, because you know if I can't have fun, I'm not going to do it. That is the worst looking scrub ever drawn. I'm going to have to get some kind of drawing mechanism for this computer, I guess. All right, so let's jump out of here, and then I'm going to get us back over to the actual listing agreement. So here we go again. All right, guys, like I was saying, this is the Florida Association of Realtors exclusive right of sale listing agreement. There are several different types of listing agreements out there. So you're going to have, sorry, I'm just checking to make sure nobody's waiting in the waiting room. So there is, what we typically use is the transaction agency version of this. So in 2006, all realtors in this, I'm sorry, 2008, all realtors in the state of Florida became assumed as a transaction agent. Prior to that, we had a lot of agents who worked as single agents. They could, and the seller could consent for the agent to transition to a transaction broker. Now it's just assumed that all agents are transaction agents unless otherwise stated. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means too. The number one thing it means is that, or a couple of things that it's important that you know, as a transaction agent, what that means to you is that you're working for the transaction. You do not represent or protect either the buyer nor the seller. You're working for a win-win transaction using this document. Also, you don't have a client when you are a transaction agent, you have a customer. Clients refer to fiduciary, and that's going to be the major difference between transaction agency and single agency. The third type of exclusive right of sale listing agreement is a no brokerage relationship agreement. That might be something that you would use if you were had a for sale by owner and you brought a buyer to the for sale by owner. I highly recommend that you get two documents signed from that seller, a commission agreement and a no brokerage relationship agreement, because if you do not, then you are assumed to be working both sides of the transaction to create a win-win agreement. By having the for sale by owner sign a no brokerage relationship agreement, you are reducing your liability. Now, if you do that, you also need to have the buyer sign a buyer broker agreement with single agency, because even though you've stated to the seller, I do not have a relationship with you, the relationship that is assumed with the buyer is that of a transaction agent unless you put some type of different agency in writing. Now, if all this agency stuff is a little confusing, there is, we just taught Jody, mine is his last name, Staples. Jody Staples and I just taught a agency class about 2 weeks ago. That class was recorded and is on our KW Chadwick YouTube page, so you can go back in. Another thing, continuing education. Many of you guys might be up for continuing education for March 31st. It might be September 30th. I highly recommend that you really do your continuing education and pay attention. I can't tell you how many questions I get every day that are covered in your 63-hour pre-licensing course, your 45-hour post-licensing, and in your continuing education stuff. Guys, this isn't stuff you can just kind of like scroll through real quick and ignore. You're out there working with the public, writing legally binding agreements. And so it's very important that we make sure that we're doing our job the right way. All right, so let's get started on this exclusive right of sale listing agreement. As I mentioned, each line has a number. Each line that needs to be filled out has an asterisk. So you've got the seller and the broker's name. Why is it the broker's name? Anybody know? All listings belong to the broker. Thank you, Joy. Joy is an experienced agent out of Michigan, just finished the licensing course for the state of Florida, so that information is fresh. Yes, all listings in the state of Florida belong to the broker. At Keller Williams Realty, we tell you that the listing belongs to you, and it does. If you ever wanted to leave Keller Williams, you could take your listing with you. However, in the eyes of the state, the listing belongs to the broker. You're more than welcome to put the broker's name in there with a slash and include your name, but in the eyes of the state, the broker owns the listings. Also, it's important for you guys to understand, in the eyes of the state, the broker owns the commission as well. So if you're making any type of concessions or reductions in your commission, you have to get broker approval, and there's specific ways that you have to write that up. It cannot be agent to agent. So these are important things that I'm just going to remind you of as we go through. So we've got the seller's name. You want the name of their legal name in here. And you need all the parties of the title to be on the seller line. And it says right here, seller certifies and represents that it is legally entitled to convey the property and all of the improvements. So you need to make sure you have all the sellers' names on here, and all the sellers do have to sign the listing agreement. And then you have your listing agreement time frame on line 6. Now, who in the class remembers, as a realtor in the state of Florida, we cannot write agreements that last more than how many months? 12, right, Dana? As realtors in the state of Florida, we cannot write contractual agreements for more than 12 months. That says, well, if the name is longer than the line can accommodate, such as a trust account. Thank you for that, Yvette. When you are just adding the text box through DocuSign or anything, you can make it double-lined. Guys, you know another really cool thing you can do with these? You can print them out and actually write on them. I know that's such a foreign concept, and you know, I grew up in the age of we actually hand wrote contracts. You can still do that. Isn't that cool? You can actually write a contract on the hood of a car. Like, you can still do that. It's okay. Yes, Leah, thank you. A year. Now, I'm just going to ask this question. Leah, is this you or is this Danielle? So I think it's actually Leah. Then we're going to jump down in here, guys. It's me. It's Leah. Thank you, Leah. So in paragraph 2, and the reason, guys, I'm going to talk about the line numbers, the paragraphs and stuff, is when you're having a conversation with a seller and you want to reference certain pieces of this agreement, then you're going to say, okay, so Mr. Seller, I'm on page 104, paragraph 2A, line 13. So it helps them just know exactly where you are. So that's where I am. We want the street address of the property and the legal description of the property. Line 17 is personal property, including appliances. Guys, you need to make sure that whatever appliances that you're seeing in the property are also owned by the seller. So reference back to the sales contract that when it talks about appliances, it says that they are existing on the property as of the time of the showing and owned by the seller. So if it is tenant occupied, you need to double check what appliances are actually owned by the seller and what appliances are owned by the tenant. If there are any excluded items, we're going to exclude items on the last page of this. Excluded items might be the refrigerator in the garage, the washer and dryer, the grandmother's chandelier hanging in the dining room, the bathroom mirrors, etc. If there are items that the seller wishes to exclude, what should be your best next step? Anybody? Yes. Thank you, Dana. Tell them to take it out now for many reasons. One is you don't want the buyer to come in and assume that that excluded item is staying. You can put it in the MLS that items are excluded. You can put it in the property disclosure that items are excluded. However, if you forget to put it in the sales contract, go back and remember the only agreement between the buyer and the seller is that sales contract, not the listing agreement. So if you wrote something was excluded in the listing agreement, you put it in the MLS, and then you as the agent got all excited when the offer and the acceptance came in and you forgot to exclude it in the sales contract, you just bought grandmother's chandelier for them, right? Genoa says if there are many items included or excluded and need more space, what form do you use for the attachment? Genoa, on this page 4 right here, you have the additional terms. You should be able to fit it on there. What happens if the seller wants to sell the property furnished? Any answers? Any ideas? I need an answer. Should be on a separate bill of lading, right? Separate bill of sale. I knew what you meant, Dana. Thank you. Personal belongings cannot be part of the sale. Exactly, Paul. Just always remember, guys, we're not furniture salesmen. We are actually realtors, and we sell real property. So we sell the real estate, not the personal property. If there was something, if the seller was selling the property furnished, then there would need to be a separate bill of sale that itemized all of the personal property that was being sold, and that needs to be an agreement between the buyer and the seller, not with agency involvement. All right, so paragraph 3, occupancy. Property is or is not currently occupied by a tenant. If occupied, the lease terms expires on blank. If it is occupied by a tenant, guys, go ahead and get a copy of that lease. The new buyers are going to want it. You're going to need to know how much is held in a security deposit, all of that good stuff. So go ahead and get that. And again, if it is tenant occupied, you need to double check on the appliances. Do the washer and dryer belong to the tenant, or do the washer and dryer belong to the homeowner, the seller? All right, the price and the terms. The price is going to be the price that you are putting the property on the MLS for sale. And then but let's say that the property doesn't sell for that price, you do not need to go back in and change this. You would actually have a change of status form that you would fill out that would change the price. Line 23 says financing terms. So cash, conventional. Will the house go VA and FHA? So if the house, if the house has chip paint and the appliances don't work and it has rotting wood, it probably is not going to go VA or FHA. So just take those things into consideration. If you don't know if it'll go VA or FHA, go ahead and call one of your lender partners and ask, what does a VA appraiser look for? What does an FHA appraiser look for? So that we know, will the house go VA or FHA? The next line 24, seller financing and assumption of an existing mortgage. Guys, just know all of this information right here. If the seller is going to do financing or there's an assumption of an existing mortgage, you just need to go ahead and pause, call me or Murray, and an attorney is going to need to get involved, okay? Because you cannot write a mortgage. All right, so just those two right there, and just go ahead and pause and know that an attorney would get involved. This is very rare though. And then line 37 is seller expenses. Seller will, let me see, I don't know how, maybe that's a little easier for you guys to see, is it? If I could close this piece, I would, but I don't know how to. So this says, the seller expenses. Seller will pay mortgage discount or other closing costs not to exceed blank percentage of the purchase price and any other expenses seller agrees to pay in connection with this transaction. A good rule of thumb is 2% right here. And what that covers is going to be any of their closing costs, any taxes, etc. It typically is going to be closer to 1.2% of the purchase price. But if you want to add a cushion in there, you can put it up to 2%. If you want to know the exact expenses a seller is going to have on the sale of their property, highly recommend calling a title company. I know I use Tampa Bay Title for all my transactions. They're one of our partners with the office, and they can do a seller net sheet for you. So the seller can actually see what their expenses are going to be. You can do that prior to going on to having the listing agreement signed, so the seller has an idea of what their expenses will be. Broker obligations. Broker agrees to make it diligent and continued efforts to to sell the property in accordance with this agreement until a sales contract is pending on the property. And then now we're going to get into the multiple listing service information. So we're going to talk a lot about this. This paragraph and the next couple of paragraphs are to notify the seller of the benefits of putting it in the MLS to get maximum exposure to the property. Maximum exposure is ideal to bring the highest and best price with the best terms for the seller. And so all of this is just telling the seller that you, as a member of the MLS, as a participant of the MLS, that you have a certain set of policies and rules that you have to follow, one of which being to put it into the MLS, unless otherwise the seller has authorized you a different direction. So with this revised version of the listing agreement, it actually puts a lot of the language in there for the MLS waiver information. However, you still have to submit the MLS waiver to Stellar MLS so that they have record of it. Sorry, I have notes over here. I just need to make sure I turn my page. All right, so paragraph 6, marketing the property to the public. So this is going to be, the reason for this language is it's going to coincide with the with the clear cooperation rules. So what is the public and what is considered marketing the property? So with the clear cooperation rules, you have from the time that you have the listing agreement signed until you put it active in the MLS, without the waivers, you have 5 business days to get it into the MLS. So that gives you time to get the yard cleaned up, painted, staged, whatever you need to do, professional photography. And the idea is those 5 days help you get the property ready. Now, in the past, a lot of agents have post-dated listing agreements. So, or they just wait to get it signed until it's closer to the date that they're going to put it in the MLS. What are some potential hazards of doing it that way? So what would be something that potentially could cause issues if you post-dated the listing, or if you waited, if you knew you were getting the listing but it wasn't going to be ready until March 1st, so we just waited until the end of February to get it signed? What would be some of the obstacles or issues you might come across if we just waited? They change their mind or go with someone else. Exactly. And thank you, Dana. And like Leah says, you have no protection. Absolutely. So guys, the idea of the listing appointment is for you to get the listing agreement signed. If it's not ready for the MLS, if it's not ready to be shown yet, then we have all kinds of ways to handle those situations, but you're not protected until you get this document actually signed. So make sure that we're getting it signed. So this defines what public marketing is. Essentially, you can't do any flyers, you can't put a signpost up, you can't put it on social media, all of that good stuff. Now, there are a lot of gray areas, and a lot of realtors are finding ways to market the property without really marketing the property. One of my favorite ones is when you guys are at your listing and the photography is happening, then you're taking a picture and Genoa, I know you've done this one too, because I love it. I remember seeing it, that you guys take a picture of the photographer taking a picture of the property. And you're like, got another listing coming at the photography session. Yes, don't be guilty. It's great. It's smart. And so you guys are putting it out there that you're getting new listings coming. And so you're doing it without putting the address, without letting people know of the specific property. But you're just telling the public that you have a new property coming available soon. My favorite one that I recently saw was Matt Krieger said, he believes 100% in the clear cooperation rules, and he just wanted us to see the cool pictures that his new iPhone takes. So he had put a bunch of pictures of the property, and he said, "Look at the cool pictures my new iPhone takes." So I thought that one was funny. All right, so this is paragraph 8. A is will not market the property to the public, or will market the property to the public. And then B is not publicly market to the public. The seller opts out. So the seller does not authorize the broker to display the property on the MLS, and the seller understands and acknowledges that if the seller checks 6BI for sale sign will not be placed in the property, and that the broker will be limited to marketing the property only to agents within the broker's office. So we're going to go through what that process means when we talk about clear cooperation rules. So there are two different types of waivers. Once you get the listing agreement signed, there's the office exclusive waiver, and then there's also the temporary excluded from the MLS waiver. And we can discuss which one is going to be better. So far, are we all on the same page? Everybody good? Yeah, okay. So all of this information we're going to cover when we talk about clear cooperation rules. So I'm going to just scroll down here. Paragraph 7, the seller obligations just to cooperate, make sure that they are disclosing anything they know that may materially affect the value of the property. Oh, but what if they've never lived in the home? Anybody? Does the seller have to disclose if they've never lived in the home? Yes, thank you, Dana. Yes, the seller has to disclose anything they know that may materially affect the value of the property. So it doesn't matter if they've ever lived in the home or not. They have to disclose according to the state of Florida. The property disclosure document that we use is actually just to assist them in asking them questions of things that they may know about the property. That document legally does not have to be filled out. They can verbally disclose. However, then you gotta, like if you went to court, how are you going to prove whether something was verbally disclosed or not? That's why we recommend that it get put in writing by the seller. But the seller always has to disclose whether they've lived in the property or not. So anytime you see a property disclosure that's marked out and said seller has not occupied the property, the reason that will not get accepted by our compliance officer is because occupancy is not a part of disclosure. So Leah, you put non-occupancy disclosure. So just guys, if you ever see a non-occupancy disclosure, just go ahead and take it and throw it away. It's worthless, honestly. But there are some brokerages out there that use those. And when you see that, we're not going to have our buyer sign it. What we have instead is a disclaimer to the buyer saying, we've requested the seller to disclose anything they know about the value of the property. They are unwilling to disclose anything they know about the value of the property. And we're just asking the buyer to sign off that we've done our part in requesting it. We just haven't received it. And we have to have our buyers sign a disclosure or no seller disclosure. Correct. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Leah. Yes, that's what it's called. It's called a no seller disclosure. So we actually have a disclaimer we can use if the seller is unwilling to fill out a property disclosure. Then there is a disclaimer that we can use called a no seller disclosure. I just want to scroll back up because I know Yvette had asked a question. Does line 65 relate to both A and B of section 6? So let's go back and look at line 65. Thank you, Yvette. No, this is just, line 65 is just for not publicly marketing to the public, which is going to be B. So that just falls under paragraph B. Do you guys see what she's asking? So these initials, this is just if the seller wishes to opt out of public marketing. Thank you for asking that question. Anything else that you guys heard or have questions about right here as far as seller obligations? The seller also has to make the property readily available to be shown. So if it is tenant occupied, you can't say, oh, I'm sorry, tenants are in there, I can't show it to you. Or, yeah, I know it's on the MLS, but we can't show it for another week and a half. If the property cannot be shown within a reasonable time frame, then you have to temporarily remove it from the MLS until it is available to be shown. Compensation, any questions so far? Questions? Have you guys ever taught a class via Zoom? Has anybody ever taught a class? Paul is saying yes.
I hate it.
What did you not like about it?
The lack of participation.
Well, we actually have good participation. Thank you, Kristen and Joy. We actually have good participation, but it's just so quiet in this
Like
room.
you're just talking to yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I'm just talking to myself. You know, it's kind of entertaining to me as well, but it is very different for sure. All right, so let's talk about compensation, guys. This is the seller will compensate. Which broker is the seller compensating? The seller agency, the listing broker, right, Paul? So the seller will compensate the listing broker as specified below. So this is going to be the total compensation that they are offering. So if you are getting a 6% commission agreement here and you're offering 3% to the buyer broker, line A needs to say 6%, or if it's 5% or 5.5% or 7%, whatever it is, it needs to be the total commission of the purchase. Compensation goes in here. If you're charging the seller any type of transaction fee or anything, would go right here. Line B is for consideration paid for an option. So an option would be a buyer says, I want the option to purchase this property. Then there's an actual option agreement. And this can be a dollar amount or a percentage amount of that option to be paid to the broker. Or for some crazy reason, if it did not sell and you wanted to lease the property instead, this would be a percentage of the gross lease value. I recommend filling all three of these out. You never know what's going to happen during the listing agreement. So go ahead and fill all three of those out. So whatever does happen, you're protected. Line 118 talks about the broker's fee and when it is due. And the reason this is important, guys, I know a lot of people look at this. It says on line 125, however, no fee will be due to the broker at the property. Oh, wait, sorry. So there's language in here. I'm trying to find it. The seller doesn't actually have to close on the property in order for us to be due our broker compensation. And what this refers to is if we brought you a contract, we brought you an agreement, and remember the agreement is for a lot more than just purchase price. There's dates and terms and all kinds of stuff. But let's say that the buyer and the seller go under contract, and 2 weeks into it, the seller says, oh, I decided I don't want to sell my property any longer. Then there are a lot of consequences to that, one of which is the listing brokerage can sue the seller for the compensation. The buyer's broker can only sue the listing broker for compensation. The listing broker has to sue the seller for compensation. The buyer can also sue for specific performance, requiring the seller to sell the property under the contractual terms that were agreed upon. So there are some legal obligations of the seller in order to perform. Line 122 talks about a protection period. Guys, you need to make sure you always fill this out. So this is one of those blanks that, you need to make sure you know what is a protection period. Let's say that you took a listing. It did not sell during the time frame that you had it listed. However, if the property is if there's a transfer of the property within the protection period, the listing brokerage is still due a commission. Example would be you had open houses and it never sold, and a week after the listing expired, one of the buyers from the open house connects with the seller, and the seller contracts with the buyer and it closes. Guess what? The activity that you were doing to market the property actually brought the buyer. The listing broker is due compensation. So you are still protected. However, if the seller contracts with another brokerage or agent during the termination or during the protection period, then you no longer have a protection period. So if they relist the property your protection period goes bye-bye. Everybody got that? What is a usual amount for 8C? So Paul asked, what is a usual amount for 8C being the gross lease value? Typically what I see here is anywhere from 8 to 12%, Paul. Okay. Any questions so far? How many days should we put for days after termination? Typically, most people do 90 days. Some people will do 180 days, so 3 months or 6 months. If they relist it with someone else, your protection period is null and void, so it doesn't matter. But I do think that having a protection period is extremely important. This retained deposits, line 127. So let's just say if a buyer defaulted and there was escrow deposit retained, this says that the broker is entitled to receive 50% if left blank of all deposits that the seller retains as liquidated damages. Even though it states it in here, it's not automatic. It still is a process that we have to go through in order to get that retained deposit. This next area, paragraph 9, is an area I see a lot of mistakes made. So I just want to make sure that we are very clear on this. Whatever compensation you put in here, this is the compensation that you're saying that you will pay to another realtor for bringing you a buyer. This compensation needs to be included into this total compensation. So if this says 6% up here, or I'm sorry, if you're offering 3% here and you put 3% here, guess what? You're not getting paid because you're giving out 3%, but the total compensation is only 3%. You follow me? This number includes the compensation that the listing broker is receiving and the buyer broker. This down here is just the compensation being paid to the buyer broker. So this is you telling the seller, hey, I'm cooperating with other agents, and in order to attract them to bring buyers, this is the amount I'm offering out. And so that's what this amount is. Whatever this amount is also needs to be the exact same that you put in the MLS. So these terms need to mirror whatever you put in the MLS. If you're using an administrative assistant or somebody else that's inputting your listings for you, it is your responsibility to go back and make sure it's done correctly. I did have a scenario where the listing agent was one of our Keller Williams agents, and her administrative assistant put the total compensation from line 109, put the total compensation in the MLS under the cooperation of a transaction agent. And so our agent did not get any money, because remember, that is where the contract for compensation goes, is in the MLS. So there's a couple of boxes in here, guys. So the first box is a percentage to a single agent, and the second box is a percentage to a transaction broker, and the third box is a percentage of the purchase price to a broker who has no brokerage relationship to the buyer. So if you are putting in there 3% minus 250 or 100 or 295 or whatever you put in there, remember that minus amount is nothing more than commission. There's no such thing as an MLS fee. You can't call it a transaction fee. That is just total compensation being offered. Do you have to put a percentage minus an amount? Is that required? I'll just go ahead and tell you, no, it's not required. Thank you, Michelle. You can just put 3%, 2.75, 2.9. I don't care. But you don't have to put a minus amount. And you guys can help stop that ridiculous minus amount. I got to tell you, it started back in the early 2000s. What is the minus amount? We don't have that in Philly. Exactly. Thank you, Paul. It started back in the early 2000s. The brokerage started doing it. They were calling it an MLS fee here locally. And then another brokerage started doing it to kind of capture some money. They saw it as a revenue stream. So then another brokerage started doing it. And before you know it, everybody was doing it. MLS said you cannot call it an MLS fee because we're not charging it. It's not an MLS fee. Then agents started calling it a transaction fee. And then Board of Realtors said you can't call it a transaction fee unless you can prove there were transactional costs that were paid for with that money that wasn't paid with the commission. Now it's just called compensation. You don't have to put it in there. You guys, Keller Williams Realty is the largest brokerage around here, so you guys could actually stop it by just stopping it. So I highly recommend doing that. People just see it as an additional income source. So if you're if you're paying somebody 3% minus $295, that means you're actually capturing an additional $295. Please reflect on this. I still don't understand it. Joy, there's really nothing to understand because there's no rhyme or reason to it. So what it shows up as in the MLS, it shows up as 3% minus 295, like that. Okay, that's considered the total compensation. And like 90% of all real estate brokerages and agents out there do it this way in our area. There's really no reason why they do it. Nobody knows why it's done. I know that's not a good answer, but that's the truth. So the compensation I'm offering out is, yes, so the commission would be less $295, exactly. So let's just say if it's a $5,000 commission, then you would say 3% would be $5,000, then you would subtract $295 from that, and that would be the total commission. I don't have a good answer for you. Why don't they just say 2.89? They could, and you guys can. You don't have to put minus 295. Paul said, and that 295 goes to the listing agent side. Yeah, the listing agent. It's deducted from the buyer's agent side, and it's given to the listing agent side. So the listing agent gets that much out of the buyer's commission. Correct. That is correct, Kelly. Yvette, did you have a question you were going to ask? You're muted, sweetie. You're muted.
Sorry. Line 136, where it states none of the above, if this is checked, the property cannot be placed in the MLS. So I've heard of somewhere they pay just a fee so that you can list it into the MLS. Say a for sale by owner asks you just to list their property, and are you obtaining a fee for compensation?
So what this is saying is, so remember, this is cooperation. This is cooperation compensation right here. So the whole concept of the MLS is for cooperation and compensation. So if you're not offering commission or compensation out to another agent, then it cannot be put in the MLS. You have to offer compensation to another agent for helping you sell the property if you're going to put it in the MLS. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I just wanted to clarify. I don't know. It just always stood out to me. Thanks.
Okay, so back in the day, and I haven't seen this in a long time, but this is like 2005, 2006. There was a bunch of those flat fee brokerages around that would list for sale by owners, and the compensation they would offer would be $202 minus $200. Now, how much money is that? $202 minus exactly, Michelle, $2. And that is considered compensation according to the MLS and the Board of Realtors. So, but if they didn't have that $2 in there, then there wouldn't be any compensation. It could not go in the MLS. That in that scenario is when it is so critical for you to have a buyer broker agreement with compensation from the buyer into your agreement so you can ensure you get paid. Great question. Thank you for asking it, Yvette. Conditional termination, guys. This is, right here, if the seller is terminating the listing agreement, it says the seller must sign a withdrawal agreement, reimburse broker for all direct expenses incurred in marketing the property. So any photography, money put out, etc., plus a cancellation fee. So you could actually charge the seller a cancellation fee right here. Genoa says, can you give an example of when no brokerage relationship line 134 or 135 would apply? I struggle to explain this to a seller frequently. There's a couple of different examples. It's just, you know, sometimes if you have an attorney that's purchasing, you might do a no brokerage relationship you might do a no brokerage relationship with a corporation, but it doesn't mean that you're not bringing the buyer. The agent can still bring the buyer. They just aren't tied in a brokerage agency relationship. So like we're assumed to be transaction agents. Let's say that you listed the property as a single agent and one of the agents in the office wanted to bring you the buyer. They can't because you're a single agent. However, they could do a no brokerage relationship with that customer and you could still represent the seller in a fiduciary responsibility because now they have a no brokerage relationship. Does that make sense? Paul said, okay, yes. Paul says, do agents actually put in an amount on line 144? And if so, how much? Paul, some agents do. They might put 500, 1,500. Some put 0 and say, look, if I'm not doing my job, you can cancel at any time. But yeah, some agents do. And those are 2 examples of an amount I've seen before. Dispute resolution, guys, this is just saying that if we cannot get everything resolved during mediation, that the seller is agreeing that we go into binding arbitration. So that's paragraph 12. Miscellaneous agreement is binding on the sellers and the brokers, heirs, their personal representatives. So if anything happened. And then additional terms. Now this is where we're going to talk about variable commission. Variable commission would be that if you're saying to the seller, if I bring the buyer and work as a transaction agent with the buyer and the seller and no other broker or agent is due a commission in this sale, then I will reduce my commission to, let's say for an example, 5%. Now I'm just going to caution you guys, because when you're working both sides of the transaction like that, it's more work. It's not less work. So even though that you want to give a discount, you're actually working twice as hard and you've cut your income. So it really doesn't make a lot of sense. But the reason why we have to disclose this, let's say that we have a listing, it goes on the market and we have a multiple offer situation. We have 5 offers that come in. One of the offers is from a buyer that does not have another broker involved in the transaction. So therefore the commission that the seller would pay would be less if the seller chose to go with the buyer that you bring to the table. You follow me on that? So if you have a variable commission, you're reducing the commission if you bring the buyer to the table. So the seller looks at all 5 offers. Well, the one that has the variable commission is called an unfair advantage if it's not disclosed to those other 4 agents and buyers, because one has an unfair 1% difference. So that's why you have to disclose a variable commission. You have to tell the other buyers and their representatives that, hey, I have a buyer and I have a variable commission, so that they can be competitive in that multiple offer situation. Does that make sense? Any questions on that one? All right, I'm going to keep going because we're running out of time, but I will stay in here as long as we need. Then you're just going to do the seller signature and the authorized sales associate or broker. So guys, I don't actually have to sign this because you are an authorized sales associate. Thank you, Jana. She says it makes sense. So I want to jump over here real quick to our clear cooperation rules. If you want to find out all of these rules, all you got to do is type in the words clear cooperation. There's website after website after website. This is the one from Stellar MLS that gives you a good rundown, breakdown of exactly what is going on. But I'm going to pull up. There are 2 types of MLS waivers. There's the office exclusive MLS waiver, and then there is the owner's authorization to temporarily exclude the listing from the MLS. I highly recommend that you guys use this one, the office exclusive. What that allows you to do is each of the offices have closed Facebook pages with just our agents of that brokerage in there. So my broker license, even though I'm the broker for the 3 offices, does not mean you can cross market those into each of the offices, because each brokerage has its own separate broker license number. But if you are in, let's say I'm sitting in the downtown office right now, I'm heading over to Gulf Beaches in a few minutes, but let's say that I'm in the downtown office, I take a listing, I have the seller sign this office exclusive, I can actually put this property out to the agents of my brokerage to see if they have a buyer they're working with that would be a good fit. I haven't violated any rules of the MLS if I do it that way. However, let's say that one of the agents from the brokerage does have a buyer. They bring a buyer and they put it under contract. You have 1 day from that moment to get it in the MLS. All right. At any point in time, whether you're using the office exclusive agreement or the actual exclude the listing from the MLS, whichever one you're using, if at any point in time you do any type of public marketing, then you have 1 business day to get that property live in the MLS. Secret. You can start marketing it on Friday and not have to put it in the MLS until Monday, because it's a business day. It's not a 24-hour period that I keep hearing so much about. It's a business day. So if you take a listing, you can start marketing it on a Friday for an open house over the weekend, and you don't have to put it in the MLS until Monday. If Monday is a national holiday, you don't have to put it in the MLS until Tuesday. Yvette said, so we only need one or the other, not both. Correct, Yvette. You just need one or the other. You do not have to have both signed. Actually, you shouldn't have both signed. They're completely different. One is saying that you're excluding it from the MLS, and the other is saying that it's an office exclusive listing. This no entry into the MLS can be changed at any point in time just by having the sellers agree to put it in the MLS. Public marketing is defined in both of these documents and in the listing agreement as any type of public facing marketing. So you can't do any email blast. You could send it to a few particular buyers that you have a buyer broker agreement with, that you're working with exclusively. That way you're not sending it out to the public. We did just have one where one of our agents in the office brought a buyer to a for sale by owner. She had a no brokerage relationship signed with the for sale by owner. She has a commission agreement signed with the owner, and she has a buyer broker agreement single agency signed with the buyer. Put it under contract, put a sign in the yard saying pending. Somebody reported her as a violation to Stellar MLS. She got an email yesterday saying, hey, you're going to get a fine if you don't get this listing into the MLS. It's not a listing. It's not her listing. She doesn't have it listed. So she can't have an exclusion from MLS if she doesn't have the listing. It's a for sale by owner. That's another thing that you guys need to remember. Like this is the concept behind this, is to help sellers get maximum exposure of their listing and to have clear cooperation with all of our realtor partners in our realtor community. So we want to give everybody an opportunity to see the property and get into the property. And so these 2 forms are just saying the property's not ready. The seller does not want to put it on the MLS. And there are a lot of sellers who don't want their home on the MLS. It's kind of crazy. I hear it more and more. They don't want it on the MLS. They don't want to sign in the yard. They don't want their neighbors to know. But if you find a buyer, I'll sell it type of thing. You guys ever heard that? No longer do you have to have pocket listings. You can go ahead and have them sign a listing agreement and have them sign this office exclusive. All right, so I ran through the listing agreement and the Stellar MLS clear cooperation rules and documents. So like I said, you can find these documents right here at stellarmls.com. /clear cooperation. All of the rules, there's videos, the documents, everything's in here. If you want the signed copy of the documents, you can find those on our closed Facebook pages if you just search. Any questions that you have? I know I kind of went through this real quick, but there were a couple of things I wanted to hit on, make sure I got protection period, variable commission, and how to use the MLS waivers. Very helpful. Thank you, Junwa. Will this recording be posted on the YouTube channel? I believe so. I never have anything to do with that, but I believe Shantae does that, so hopefully so. Any questions, anything that you wanted to, that you have questions about that I did not cover that I could get to? No? Okay, guys, again, I just went real quick through all of these documents. It's key that you go in, print them off. Like you can see, I've highlighted mine. I wrote on it. Like go in, use these. These are tools. You really, once you know the language of these documents and feel comfortable with it, then you're going to be so much more confident going in on that appointment. So I highly recommend that you just go in and dig into the documents, really make sure you understand the language. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, shoot me a text, come by the office, call Murray, call legal hotline, like any of those things. But knowledge of your binding contracts is going to be key for your business. So I so appreciate you all being here today, enhancing your knowledge and participating. You guys did awesome participating. I know it's hard to do via chat box, but I really appreciate that you were in here and that you are participating. So thank you so much. And look forward to seeing you all soon. Have a great day, guys. Bye.